An Artful Deceit. The Art of Love, Book 1. Written by Holly Newman. Performed by R.J. Bailey. Chapter 1. The Sketch. The Viscount Sebastian Redinger's blonde Adonis good looks were marred by more than bruises and bandages. A petulant frown pulled at his features when he saw his butler at the door of his bedchamber with a visiting card on a silver salver. "Who is it now, Randolph? If it's Timmy Wainbottom or Jerry Jessup or Chester Harley come to gloat, tell them I'm napping or some such thing. I'll not abide their snickers. It was all their fault. I just went along for the giggles." He plucked restlessly at his bed-covers.
"I'm sure it is as you say, my lord, but it is neither of those two gentlemen. If it had been, I assure you I would have sent them roundly about their business," his butler said crisply.
Redinger grinned, quite in his old manner.
"You're a right one, you are, and no mistake. It was my fortunate day when I stole you from my parents' employ."
"Thank you, my lord,"
Randolph solemnly returned, not a muscle in his cheek twitching, to betray that the Earl of Galborough was paying him a handsome fee to watch out for his errant heir, and that in addition to his wages from Redinger. Randolph wondered what the old Earl would say to this latest escapade. Done himself up good, the young master had. Nonetheless, he consoled himself against his employer's anger with the knowledge that he had hitherto managed to steer their heir clear from the clutches of a certain breed of females, and it looked like Redinger was about to take the plunge into precisely the sort of marriage his estimable parents desired. If it came to pass, Randolph was sure his retirement would be in refined comfort. The Earl and Countess of Galborough were most generous for what they considered onerous labour. But this was not for the Viscount's knowledge, and his duty still demanded he act as Redinger's man.
"If I may be so bold, my lord, I venture to say this guest shall be a welcome respite from your pain."
He handed Redinger the card.
"The Duke of Ellinbourne is below."
"Miles Wingate? Here, in the city? Why, I say, that is fabulous news."
The Viscount stared at the card a moment, grinning broadly. He waved peremptorily at his man.
"Well, don't just stand there like a clodhead, Randolph. Show him up! Show him up!"
Randolph bowed.
"Immediately, my lord."
A moment later, Randolph opened the door to the bedchamber to admit Miles Wingate, 6th Duke of Ellinbourne. The Duke paused on the threshold, a rare smile cracking his habitually reserved countenance as he took in his cousin's battered appearance, as he lay amid a pile of lace-edged white pillows and cut red velvet bedcovers and hangings. The late morning sun streaming across the bed backlit his blonde hair, now in wild disarray, like a halo. Miles' fingers drummed to the sketchbook he held, composition ideas immediately forming in his mind. Redinger grimaced back at him.
Come in. I know, don't say it. I've come a cropper."
With a sweeping motion, his good arm indicated his bandaged and bruised face, and his arm trussed up in a black silk sling. Miles nodded wryly at Redinger's understatement. He walked into the room and murmured his thanks as he sat down in the chair Randolph drew up for him by the bed. He returned his attention to his cousin, his brown eyes closely examining Redinger's face in the bright sunlight cast on it through the open window curtains, his lips twitching against laughter. "I must say, that is the most interesting shade of purple, mottled with yellow and green, on the side of your face. I wonder if I could reproduce it with paints."
"Humph!"
Redinger turned his head away from the glaring light, then his lips reluctantly twisted into a smile. His eyes slid toward Miles, ruefully conceding his right to amusement.
"Might make an interesting portrait. Think the Earl would mount it along the stairway with the others?"
Miles mused. Redinger guffawed, then gasped, clutching his side. He shook his head, then gulped, as the sharp stabbing pain caused by his laughter subsided, and he found his voice.
"No room, thank God. And knowing him, he would. Object lesson and all that rubbish. Then again, you being a duke and all now, he wouldn't approve." "Ah, yes,
Let me see. Miles laid one long finger alongside his nose. He'd deem it not quite proper and a bit too plebeian. That's it. The Duke leaned back in the chair and stretched out his legs. I was an artist long before I became a duke. Everyone knows that, just that my father thinks you should put that behind you. I know, but almost until it happened, within days even, I had no expectations of the title. Or its responsibilities, Miles said, exasperation eloquent in his voice. He ran a hand through his wavy brown hair. I'd be a hypocrite to my art if I let a title change all that, to say nothing of the insult to those who went before me. I've had enough changes in my life, he finished softly, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Redinger nodded sympathetically. He knew his cousin's history only too well, for Miles Wingate's father's living had been in the Earl of Galborough's gift. To rise from the younger son of a country parson to Duke of Ellinbourne had not been a smooth transition for Miles. It was an elevation he still grappled with. For a time, he'd even contemplated the almost unheard of, repudiating the title. That he hadn't spoke volumes for Miles' sense of honour and duty. Redinger knew he would have been hard-pressed to follow his cousin's example. Then again, that could be considered a given, for no two men seemed less likely to form a firm friendship, even as cousins. Redinger was flighty, and up for all manner of pranks and fun. He lived comfortably in society, revelling in its glitter and gaiety. Miles preferred quiet, his nature more serious. He preferred hours before his easel with paint-pots and brushes to hours in the ballrooms or society's clubs. "But what brings you to the city?" Redinger asked, never one to dwell on dismal matters. "Thought you were fixed forever on that estate of yours." Miles quite willingly accepted his change of subject. "The Royal Academy of Arts is due to open again in a couple of weeks, and I have a picture accepted for the next showing." "No, you don't say! By Jove, that's jolly good news." "I think so. There was some question as to my eligibility. Now, your father is not alone in his opinion. Dukes patronize art. They don't create it." Redinger waved his hand dismissively. "These are modern times. People have to learn to adjust." Miles laughed. "And is it these modern times that make boxing the watch acceptable?" Redinger had the grace to look discomfited. "You heard about that?" "Almost upon rising. Of course, the thrust of the story was how comical you looked, trapped underneath the watchman's box with the poor fellow still inside cursing you all." "Yes, well, it weren't so comical to feel, and Wainbottom, Jessup, and Harley just stood there and laughed. I've half a mind to call 'em out when I recover. It was their idea, and their fault it fell on me. And that watchman weren't no poor fellow." "Not according to their story." "Whatever it is, they're lying. I was in a muddle with a devil of a head, and here's this gent calling out all's well when I knew my head hurt too much for it to be well. And so I said to Wainbottom. He giggled, as he does, and told me to tell that to the old man myself. So I come up to the box and try to tell him this, you see, but he's not listening. Dry old stick. So I jump up to hang on to the side and to get closer. That's when Wainbottom's giggles get the best of him, and Jessup joins in, and both lean against the box from the opposite side, too helpless to stand up. The old man's shouting at us and batting me with his cane. I didn't care none for this, so I grabbed it. That's when the box started to tumble toward me. I landed on my back in the mud, ruined my best jacket, it did. To say nothing of your arm, side, or face." "Oh, the face weren't from the fall. That was from that damned old gent's cudgel. Caught me good, he did. I'd like to cudgel him, I tell you. At least Timmy, Jerry, and Chester had the decency to get me out of there then. Wouldn't do to be found on one's back in the dirt, you know." Miles muffled a laugh at Redinger's sincere tone. "No, I don't suppose it would. Don't laugh. 'Tis the truth." Miles straightened and adopted his most non-committal expression. "To be sure. But who's laughing?" "Well, it looked suspiciously like you were." "Me? Oh, come now, Sebastian. I'm much too sober a fellow, or so you've always told me.
So you are, most of the time, leastwise with other people. But I remember—
"Excuse me, my lord. May I offer you gentlemen refreshments?"
Redinger's butler asked from the bedchamber doorway, a silver tray in hand bearing drinks, tea for the invalid and Madeira for his guest.
"Capital idea, Randolph," Redinger said with relief. "But what's this? Tea? Oh, wipe that mutinous expression from your face. I dashed well remember what that quack doctor said. All right, I'll drink it. But see if Mrs. Mendel has any of those cakes of hers that I like so well. Poppy seed with icing, simply smashing,"
he told Miles, as Randolph bowed and left the room.
"See if you don't agree."
Redinger subsided and was silent, a deep crease incised on his brow. He plucked at his bed-covers, his eyes not meeting his cousin's. Miles cocked his head and raised his eyebrows.
"You can't know how dash glad I am to see you, Miles. This," he waved at his injuries, "has come at a devilishly awkward time."
"Really?" Miles prompted. He studied his cousin. It wasn't like Redinger to be so cut up over anything. Almost absent-mindedly, he flipped open his sketchbook and pulled a piece of charcoal wrapped in paper from his pocket.
"Mother and father have been after me to get married and produce an heir." He gave a bark of laughter. "They're afraid my ramshackle existence will lead to an early grave, and if the next in line ain't accounted for by me, the title will go to some plebeian nobody cousin."
"As the Ellinbourne title did," the Duke said dryly, as he quickly sketched the battered and brooding image of the Viscount.
Redinger flushed. "Didn't mean it like that. And dash it all, Miles, that ain't fair. They never thought you were nobody, as if anyone could. It was just that— well, just that—"
Miles looked up from his drawing. "That being an artist is beneath thought." Redinger shrugged and shifted uncomfortably beneath his cousin's steady regard. Miles sighed and relented. "So, they desire you to marry. Do they have your bride chosen?"
"Yes, been chosen nearly since she was born. The dearest wish of my grandmother and hers, and all that.
So much for your modern times."
"Well, I don't object. I would if I could find my Juliet, but I lost her a year ago. It was the damnedest thing, too. I could have sworn she loved me, and I her. But one day, she just wasn't there anymore."
"And so heartbroken, you're bravely going to forget her and marry another."
"This ain't a jest. I've got my duty, and frankly, I just don't care."
The Duke frowned. "That doesn't seem fair to your chosen bride, does it?" Redinger glanced away.
"From what I remember of her, Miss Hallowell always was a good sort."
He looked back at the Duke.
"Surely you met her? Came to the estate once with her parents? Or was that when you were away?"
"I'm sure I don't know, and can't tell you until you tell me the identity of this fortunate young woman destined to be Viscountess Redinger and then Countess of Galborough."
"Oh, yes. Well, 'tis Miss Hallowell, Miss Ann Hallowell. Father was Graham Hallowell, died 2 years back."
Miles shook his head. "Haven't heard of them."
"Heard of her grandmother, though, I'll venture. The Dowager Countess of Malmsby."
Miles paused and whistled softly. Then he laughed. "That is a name I've heard. How could I not? Hers is a name well known in art circles. Her private collection of art at Versley Park is rumoured to be outstanding, perhaps the best in the nation. If not the best, then certainly the largest, but nobody outside her family has seen it in over 5 years." Redinger nodded.
"Until now. She's having a house party beginning Friday."
Miles' light brown eyebrows rose.
"I was to attend, and while there solicit Miss Hallowell's hand in marriage. It's been all arranged.
But now?"
"It's obvious I can't go. Couldn't take the jostling in a carriage to get there, or on a horse for that matter. That's what that cursed bone-setter said. Wouldn't want to go anyway with a fizz like this."
"Yes, it does spoil the pretty boy image." Redinger grimaced at his cousin.
"Been trying to come up with a way to send my regrets gracefully. Party set up particularly so I could pop the question. Deuced awkward."
"Yes, I see what you mean."
"I've been turning it over and over in my mind. how I'm going to write and tell them I can't go. Are those the cakes, Randolph? Well, don't just stand there, man. Bring them in. Now, what was I saying? Oh, yes. The worst is I still have to tell my parents. They're invited too, naturally.
Begging your pardon, my lord,
Randolph interrupted as he set the dish of cakes on the table by the bed.
but while the doctor was with you, I took the liberty of sending a letter to inform the Earl and Countess of your unfortunate accident.
You did? Why? No, never mind. I'd not a mind to write that note anyway.
As you say, my lord.
But that still leaves the Hallowells to tell, and I'd hate just to send round a note.
Why not? Miles asked, while eyeing askance the cake with an excessive amount of sugary icing. He hoped Redinger would not press him to sample this treat. Redinger grabbed the largest piece of cake from the plate.
I remember Miss Hallowell is a shy little thing, wouldn't want to hurt her.
He took a bite of the cake. "Counting on me, you know," he mumbled, his mouth full. Miles took a sip of his Madeira, then returned the nearly full glass to the table at his elbow and resumed sketching. "Is she that far past her prayers?"
"What?"
Redinger swallowed and cleared his throat.
"Oh, no, not that at all. Miss Hallowell ain't long in the tooth, if that's what you're asking. Her stepmother and my mother been corresponding. They set the whole up between them. No, the thing is, it seems a shabby trick to send round a note."
He took another bite, his expression eloquent of satisfaction with the cake. "It doesn't appear as if it can be helped," Miles said. Redinger shook his head in contradiction, then cleared his throat again.
"Yes, it can. You could step around to their house and tell them for me." "Me? Not quite so bad coming from a duke and all."
Miles grimaced.
"Won't be that bad. I'll give you a letter to deliver to Mrs. Hallowell and a poem for Miss Hallowell."
"A poem?" Miles and Randolph said at once. Miles looked at the butler in surprise. He suddenly realized he had been standing at the side of the room, unabashedly listening to their conversation. The man was too forward for his taste.
"Yes, certainly, a poem," repeated Redinger, warming to the idea.
He looked from Miles to his butler and back.
"It's all the crack, poetry is. Women love it. Taken to writing it myself, haven't I, Randolph?"
"You?" Redinger nodded, his eyes alight with pleasure.
"I'm not bad either. Composing a poem about the accident. Just a little ditty. It's not done yet. When it is, I'll send you round a copy. Got a poem for Miss Hallowell, too. Just the ticket. Wrote it for a pretty little opera dancer I was taken with. Randolph convinced me it were too good to waste on someone who most likely couldn't appreciate its fine qualities, didn't you, my man? Dare say Miss Hallowell will like it instead."
"But, my lord,"
protested Randolph, a pained expression pulling his normally pinched face tighter. Miles tried biting his lower lip to keep from laughing. It didn't work. Randolph's expression was too comical. It was apparent Redinger's glib explanation was far from the mark as far as his butler was concerned.
"What's so funny about that?"
Redinger asked in high dudgeon. Miles choked back his laughter.
"Sorry,
never pictured you as the poetic type."
"Well, if you wouldn't bury yourself in the country, you'd know you ain't the only clever fellow."
"I'm sorry for laughing. Truly, you took me by surprise. I'd no notion you'd become a man of such wide, sensibilities." Redinger allowed himself to be mollified, though he wasn't entirely sure as to his cousin's meaning.
"Randolph, get me that poem. It's the one I tied up with a purple ribbon. Yes, that's it."
He held it for a moment in his hands, then thrust it into Miles's.
"Here, take this to Miss Hallowell."
"Oh, but, my lord, I don't believe that one would be quite appropriate,"
protested the butler, his hand reaching for the scroll. Redinger battered his hand away.
"Hush, don't worry, Randolph. You're an old woman. Miss Hallowell is a woman of taste and refinement. She'll appreciate the poem. Now, bring me a writing desk so I can dash off a note to Mrs. Hallowell."
"Right away, my lord,"
acquiesced the defeated butler. He exchanged a pained, speaking look with the Duke. The Duke shrugged, then took pity on the man. He looked back at the Viscount. "Sebastian," he said seriously, tapping the scroll against his sketchbook. "Perhaps this isn't a good idea."
"Yes, it is. Much nicer than a note sent round by a servant. After all, you're a duke." "Not you, too." "Sorry. Are you finished with that thing yet?"
Miles glanced down at the sketchbook in his lap. "Yes, and I believe I've captured the true spirit of your injuries, as you would have them," he said with a smile. Redinger reached for the sketchbook, wincing as he twisted toward Miles.
"Damn Sawbones has me wrapped too tight."
The Duke let him take the sketch from his lap, his brown eyes shining with mirth.
"What's this?"
Redinger laughed, then hastily stopped, clasping his hand to his side. The quick sketch portrayed Redinger leaning back against his nest of pillows, his expression below his bandaged brow, one of sacrificial suffering. It's the tragically wounded hero who remains noble in his suffering. It matches your poetic ideal. Redinger laughed again, then begged Miles not to make him laugh, for it hurt too much.
"But it is a devilishly clever sketch. Damned clever. Strap me if that don't give me an idea. Take that picture to Miss Hallowell along with the poem. More believable. Prove I'm not trying to give her the slip."
"Would she think that?" Redinger shrugged.
"Women are funny creatures, but you mark my words, she'll be vastly entertained with the poem and sketch."
He nodded sagely.
"Vastly,"
he repeated, feeling smug. The 6th Duke of Ellinbourne leaned back in his chair, as he wondered just what it was he'd gotten himself into. He reached for his Madeira glass, this time downing its contents with a single swallow. Something told him he should have stayed on his estate in the country.